This video is brought to you by Bright Cellars, the monthly wine subscription that will help you discover wines you'll love. Last time I spent the entirety of the video cleaning the painting, removing the surface grime, the old varnish, the old retouching, the old overpainting, and remove I did because this entire painting was covered in overpaint. In fact, it was treated like a paint by numbers, and all of that bad work had to be removed, including all of the old fill-in material, which was so uneven it was like a mountain range with valleys and peaks. Now, in the process, I discovered an additional signature, and I'll talk about that later on. But before that, I had to get the painting ready for retouching, including filling in, stretching, and applying an isolation layer, and generally getting the painting and myself ready to go toe-to-toe for round 3 with the Brawler. Two titans at the peak of their prowess step into the ring for the third and final round of a battle to last the age. Oh, come on, who am I kidding? This is not a fight. I am not trying to beat this painting into submission, though up until this point it may have seemed that way. In fact, I'm trying to do the exact opposite. I'm trying to save this painting, to restore it to its former glory, to what the artist wanted so that we can enjoy it in the future. Unfortunately, this painting doesn't know that. I mean, how could it? It's an inanimate object. It doesn't know anything. It has no opinions whatsoever. And so my focus isn't on the painting. It's really on the old work. But that too has no opinion. So maybe my real adversary is the person that did all of this bad work to this painting. But I've said enough about that. Oh, who am I kidding? I've got a couple more choice comments up my sleeve. Whenever I embark upon a retouching that has a lot ahead of me, I always like to selectively choose where I start. I could certainly start with probably the lowest of hanging fruits, pun intended, I suppose, with the brown background, but that's pretty boring and it's not really all that engaging. And actually, doing a solid color is deceptively difficult. It's really hard to match and make it look natural. So I'll choose an area that is interesting, somewhat challenging, but an area that I know I can easily retouch. And that's why I've settled on this leaf for the first part of the retouching. Yes, there is some significant damage, and it is impressive, but all things considered, this is not a terribly complicated area to retouch, and luckily enough for me, there are other leaves that I can use to guide me through what this one probably looked like. Yes, I don't know exactly what it looked like, but we're just trying to put the image together, and so using the other leaves as a cue, I think I can work my way through this. Now, notching an early win in any project that is big or challenging or just seemingly impossible to conquer is super important. Getting some early victories puts some wind in your sails, and it makes the upcoming challenges seem less formidable. For you know you've already achieved some success early on. You can just extrapolate that if you maintain that focus, that attention to detail, and replicate your working process, that the victory will come in the other parts. Yes, it's a little bit more complicated than simply saying easy win equals difficult wins, but starting off somewhere that you know you're going to do a good job, it'll make you feel more confident. And so that's why I've started with this leaf, because I'm fairly confident that I can knock this one out fairly quickly and then move on to more challenging areas. Now, one of the questions that I'm sure everybody has is how this painting got so damaged. Well, as far as I understand, this painting has been owned by the family since the beginning. They apparently got it directly from Rosen, or at least that's the family lore. And I mention lore because, like a game of telephone, these things change. And so maybe it was remembered as having been bought directly from Rosen, or maybe that's just how it was passed on to somebody whose memory then evolved. In any event, the painting had been owned, well, since the beginning, prominently displayed and enjoyed. and at some point it came down off the wall and went into storage under a bed. Certainly not the ideal place for a painting to be stored, but better than a dirty garage, a moldy basement, or a sweltering attic. And for a long time, the painting was fine under the bed until a plumber who was doing work on the house, I guess, put some pipes under the bed and went right through the painting. No fault to the plumber, he didn't know it was there. So the family took this painting to an individual who fancied themselves a conservator, and particularly a conservator of Rosen paintings, because in this town, Rosen paintings were ubiquitous. And the family can't really be faulted for this because they had no experience with conservation, and they trusted the individual who told them to trust him. And so this individual did terrible, no good, very bad things to this painting, and you have seen them all in the previous episode. And without haranguing too much on this poor soul, I just want to mention that there is a really big difference between antiquated work and bad work. Oftentimes you hear me complain about old work and point out its failures, but that's not because the practitioners were ill-informed or doing bad things. That's just because they had fallible materials, and over time those materials degraded. So we judge that work based on the time it was executed, not today's standards. But then there's this work, which, well, there's nothing I can say here on air that will be acceptable or polite. So let's just quickly move on. So as this leaf comes together and I finish working on this, I guess a green apple, you can see that the image is starting to coalesce. It's starting to make sense. Certainly beforehand, it was just a gloopy gloppy mess, but now, not so bad. So after notching an early win, getting some wind in my sails with the leaf, I am ready to move on to more difficult and challenging areas of the retouching, like the peaches and the berries. Higher hanging fruit, if you will. But with no examples next door, how am I supposed to figure out what was there when there is nothing to work from? So I found a whole bunch of Rosen paintings, and I printed them off. And I'm going to take them and mount them onto a foam board on the second easel beside my retouching easel. And as we take a close look at some of these paintings, we can see just how beautifully they were painted, how lush and how vibrant. And I think these are going to be very helpful. The only thing that I'm noticing is that all of these paintings have a glass of wine, which right now, after doing all of this work, going 2 rounds with this brawler, well, sounds really good right about now. And that's where I turn to Bright Cellars, where you can discover wine you love. So how does it work? Well, you head over to their website and you take a super simple 7-question quiz. And this is not snobby stuff. It's basically what you like, so that they can start pairing you with wines you'll love. And while they're experts, if you get a pairing you don't think you'll like, well, you can always change it. And then boom, a few days later, a box arrives with your pairings. And one of the cool things is that each wine comes with a profile card that contains information about the flavor profile and the winery itself, so that you can start to keep track of what you do and don't like, and refine the parameters that will help guide you to your next box of wines. I was going to take this home, but maybe I won't. So, is your mouth watering yet? Head on over to bit.ly/BrightCellarsBaumgartner to receive 50% off your first 6-bottle box, or just check the link below in the description. With a tantalizing treat awaiting me in my refrigerator for if and when I ever finish this painting, and a little bit of confidence and wind in my sails, having just done the retouching on the leaf successfully, I'm ready to start working on a more difficult part of the painting, and that's the peaches. And the peaches are more difficult because, well, they were painted with more care, more detail. There is more blending and shading on these. And, of course, they are right smack dab in the middle of the painting, so they are a superstar. They are a main feature, not supporting cast, so everybody's going to see them. And the first thing I do is just start color blocking and laying down some paint to define shape and form. And I'm not terribly detailed here. In fact, I'm not all that concerned if the color matches that much because I'm going to go over it repeatedly. Really, all I'm trying to do is define what I need to retouch and experiment with my color sense. Lay down a pink and see if it's too warm or too cold or too light or too dark, and then change it and then do it again. And since this is really just broad brushstrokes work, if I get it wrong here, I can easily change it. The stakes aren't all that high compared to when I'm doing the last bit of retouching and the highlights, so to speak. And while I know you would all love to hear me talk about reds and peaches and creams and brushwork and the paint that I use, I've talked about that a lot. I'll talk about it a little bit more, but really I know what you all want to hear about, and that's the signature and the situation surrounding it. Now, whenever we find a painting with two signatures, we obviously have a conundrum because they both cannot be correct. One of them must be real and one of them must be not real. But how to know which one is the authentic signature when you have no other supporting information, no provenance, no documentation? Well, you may never know. Sometimes the signature will easily come off, and you know right off the bat, well, this one is the fake because it is vulnerable and it is easily removed, or it fluoresces under blacklight, and so we know it was an addition. But sometimes when the signatures are really, really old, as in this case, well, they both fluoresce the same, and they're both aged. And under microscopic examination, they both kind of look the same. So really, it's a great mystery. And in that case, we can sometimes turn to the owner of the painting for a little bit more information. And so I reached out and I was able to contact the owner and learn a little bit about this painting's history. Now, as far back as the owner can remember, the painting has been in the family's collection from the beginning. And the family lore is that it came directly from Rosen. Now, I mention that as family lore because there isn't a receipt, there isn't a paper trail, and nobody can confirm this information. It's just been handed down throughout the generations, as so much family history is. And generally, family history that is passed down from generation to generation is somewhat accurate. But like a game of telephone, it changes a little bit, it morphs, and the facts become fuzzy, the tale becomes taller. And so the owner of the painting confided that that is how they remember it, or that is how the memory was passed to them. But it very well could be different. So, no luck there. Now, when I told the owner of this painting that there was a second signature that did not match the other signature, that it threw into doubt the entire painting, that we could no longer understand it as being by Rosen. There was conflicting information. Well, I expected, based on my past experience with situations like this, that the owner would say, "Thank you. Please package the painting and send it back. I am done with conservation. I would not like to do anything further." Because often that happens. And in those cases, I pack the painting up and I send it off. And that's that. I never see it again. I don't know if it goes into a basement or if it goes into the bin. But in this case, that's not how the client reacted. The client reacted with astonishment, with grace, and even with a little bit of excitement. And I, of course, was gobsmacked and confused because that is not what I expected. But this client said that the painting was loved as an object, that it affected within them something magical, and that the artist was almost secondary. It didn't really matter. Whether it was by Rosen or whether it was by Wilson, it didn't change the fact that some visceral enjoyment was derived from looking at this painting. And so, in the client's perspective, that there was some mystery, something conflicting about this painting, well, that just made it more interesting. Instead of being purchased by the artist and owned by the family and then damaged and then restored poorly and then off to Baumgartner for second conservation and then the subject of this video, well, now there's something conflicting about it. Who really is the artist? And will we ever know? It's a thread that could be pulled for ages. And that, to some degree, makes it a more dynamic object. As I said, it doesn't fundamentally change the image. The peaches haven't changed. The grapes didn't change color. It's not a better painting or a worse painting. Some could argue that maybe it is a more valuable or less valuable painting, or more important or less important painting in the realm of art history, but that's not why this painting is owned and loved by the owner. So this signature, surprisingly, made this a more interesting piece for the owner, which I have to say is probably the first time that that has happened. But I am delighted. In fact, I was tickled pink when I heard this, because it really speaks to the purity of the experience of looking at art. I think too often when people look at art in museums, they look at the placard on the side of the wall, and they look at who the artist was. They look at the age, maybe they read the little blip that tells them about the painting. And if it's an artist they recognize or know, they wonder how much it's worth, or how important it is. But the exploration or the experience of being touched by the art, by the image, sometimes that can get lost. And so to hear somebody that loves the painting for what the experience brings them, almost wholly irrelevant of who created it, I mean, that's art for art's sake. And that's pretty much the most pure form of art appreciation. So, while I am still curious about who the artist is, I'm not sure that I will ever know. And after hearing from the client that it didn't matter to them, well, I'm perfectly content with that answer. And so, it doesn't really matter to me. And to some degree, that's kind of liberating, because I don't have to make a hard decision about which signature to remove. This is not Solomon cutting the baby in half. I can leave them both and leave the client with a fantastic story to tell about this painting with two signatures. And so sometimes a really difficult situation has a really beautiful resolution. It is rare, but in this case, it is a testament to the owner's grace, sophistication, and truth to themselves and what they love about this painting. And so as I've wrapped up retouching these peaches, we take a look at them before. Well, there's no beauty there, nothing special. But as it comes back together, well, I think we're onto something. Now, when I started the retouching, I mentioned that I had chosen a Goldilocks sweet spot to start, the peaches, because I wanted something that I knew was going to be relatively easy and give myself a little bit of success early on, put some wind in my sails, notch an early victory. And mainly because I knew that I was going to have to work on this area. An area that is just fundamentally missing. I mean, I know that there are strawberries here, but that's about it. And so, looking at an area like this, where the entirety of the image is missing, one has to think about what approach one is going to take. And when it comes to retouching, conservators are an opinionated bunch. Ask 3 conservators, and you will get 5 opinions. There is no one right answer, and that is something I try to stress often. There is a spectrum of techniques and approaches that can be applied, and it's up to the conservator to figure out what's going to work for the client, for the painting, and for themselves, and to try to blend all of those into a recipe that will yield success. Now, on one end of the spectrum, there is the belief that no retouching should happen whatsoever, that we are just conservators, we are just here to preserve, and that this painting has had a life, and this is the scar of that life. These are the battle wounds, so to speak, and they're important. Now, that is an approach that generally seeks to treat the painting as an artifact. And we have come to understand that paintings as fine art aren't really fully artifacts. I mean, they are in the sense that they are objects, but they are not like a vase or a table or a decorative urn. Sometimes wear and patina, age is not what we want on a painting. In fact, I have talked a lot about how patina is not something that paintings have. So that, on the far end of the spectrum, I don't really see as appropriate, at least not for this painting and this client. There is then, moving a little bit closer to the other end of the spectrum, the idea that just toning the area is appropriate. That just blending it into one solid color and making it an amorphous blob so that the damage doesn't seem so dramatic would be enough. Effectively, at this point. But I don't think anybody would argue that that's okay and that that's something that could be easily overlooked. It's still a pretty big sore spot right on the painting. Maybe if it were on the edge that would be appropriate, but this is a central feature of the painting. So again, for this painting, I don't think that that's going to work. And then there are a bunch of other techniques called Mimitech and Retouching. Now, Mimitech retouching seeks to mimic or replicate what was there before the damage. And it's complicated because I don't know what was here before the damage. I don't have a photograph of this painting. I don't know for sure what the artist put here. Yes, I have some images of other paintings by the artist who maybe created this painting, but I can't know for sure. So while I talk about the conservator not making editorial decisions, unfortunately, retouching sometimes one has to. I can take my cues about where the berries were located or what they look like from the actual painting and from other paintings, but still, I'm guessing. I'm fairly certain that this is not exactly what it looked like when the artist created it. And so, to the end of Mimitech retouching, a technique was developed in the 30s by an Italian conservator, and it was called trateggio. And in Italian, trateggio means hash marks or sketching. And it's a technique whereby the image is recreated, but with an asterisk. That is, from a distance, the image will look as it should. But as the viewer gets closer, they'll start to see that the recreated berries are not made of smooth brush strokes blended in. They're made of little dots or little hash lines, sometimes on a diagonal, sometimes vertically. It is much like looking at a newspaper and seeing a photograph. But as you get closer, you can see the dots of the halftone. And you can see that the image is actually composed of thousands or millions of little dots. And so it allows the conservator to recreate the image while still telling the viewer that it is not the hand of the artist. And this technique was developed because at the time there weren't archival and fully reversible paints, and the few that were being developed were wholly imperfect. And so much of the retouching was done in oil paint, which has its own unique set of problems. And so the conservators needed a way to differentiate their work from the original, and hence the technique of trateggio was born. Now, we have reversible paints. We have paints that fluoresce under blacklight, so viewers can easily see what we have added and easily remove what we have added. Now, there are times when trateggio is appropriate, and sometimes I do have clients inquire about it. And I will show them examples and I will talk to them about what that actually means. But by and large, my clients don't want that. They say it's interesting, it's novel. They say maybe if this were in a museum, but this is going in my home. This is an important piece of my life. And I don't want to see the scars. I want this to be put back as it should. And yes, I understand that the work that you are doing is maybe not 100% accurate to the original, but the original is gone and lost. And we can cry over that as much as we want, or we can work to find a solution. And so after having that discussion, the overwhelming number of my clients, private collectors, galleries, dealers, auction houses, corporations, museums, all choose Mimitech retouching. And so, as I spend the next couple of minutes Mimiteching my way through this retouching, I'm going to go get a sip of water, or maybe chill that bottle of wine, and let you just enjoy this work. Well, I hope you've enjoyed this work, because as you can clearly see, at times it is not terribly enjoyable. Working on the background was tedious, boring, and arduous. And sometimes that's just the life of retouching. I mean, recreating berries is interesting. Putting brown paint on the background, not so much. But it is an essential part of the job, and the painting would not be complete without it. So you have to work your way through it. Luckily, there is an end. And when you finally reach it, even though you may be cross-eyed or dizzy, it is a great feeling. Now, I decided for this painting, I'm going to just spray on the varnish. I'm not going to brush it on, I'm just going to use the HVLP system. And I'm going to do that because I want to build up the layer of varnish a little bit thicker than I normally would. I know I talk about the varnish layer being really, really thin, and for most paintings that is exactly what you want, but on this painting, because there was a textural issue, I want to build up the layer a little bit more to see if I can help compensate for some of those small deviations that I just wasn't able to remove or would be more visible if I just did a thin varnish. So back and forth, slowly letting the varnish tack up a little bit in between each pass. I'm just going to start building up this layer, and I also want to avoid that orange peel. Now once I've gotten a nice layer down, I'm going to spray it from higher up, and as the varnish is atomized, the distance it has to go from the tip of the gun to the face of the painting, it's going to start drying and turn into a crystal, and it's going to stick to the surface of the painting and give a beautiful effect. And so finally, after all of that work, after 3 bruising rounds, we come to the final reveal. I even wore a nice shirt. And so here we have the painting. As it came in, it was a hot mess, fundamentally altered and almost destroyed by the previous conservator. But all hope was not lost. Though it was hard and at times painful, it was successful. And I think the results speak for themselves. Now, there is a question of whether it was worth it to do all of this work. Well, that's not for me to decide, nor is it for you. One could say that because this painting is not by the person whom everybody believed, that it is not worth anything, but that is just ridiculous, because it is magical to the owner. And I respect that. And because of that, I can forage through all of this hard work, all of this frustration, knowing that I'm going to return to my clients something that is going to return that sense of wonder and joy into their lives. And the before and after really do speak for themselves. Before, I don't know, it was bad. But after, well, I think I beat the Brawler. And Patreons, stay tuned because I'm going to be answering all of your fantastic questions in a follow-up video, and hopefully I'll have some surprises up my sleeve for you.